Welcome everybody again for already our fourth edition of the webinar by Energy Delta Institute. I'm also back, Leon Stille, and I'm here today with Bert Stuij. Bert Stuij is our Vice President of Innovation from the Energy Delta Institute. He's also a manager at RVO, the Dutch Enterprise Agency. We're very happy to have him here. He's an integral part of some of our programs, our executive programs that deal with new energy transitions, with innovation like the new energy realities, for example. So I think he's ideally placed to tell us a little bit more about new business systems, new business models, how the shift is towards new energy-related systems, and also, of course, how Corona is getting in between of all that. Before we start, I would like to have a special welcome to all the participants also from the Energy Academy program, so the students that are here with us today. Today's webinar is part of a carefully selected program of the Energy Academy. There's a wide range of topics of interdisciplinary character of the energy transition and give students the possibility to apply for Energy Academy certificate. So we hope you all are hold on for this whole webinar, and then you have to fill in a questionnaire afterwards, and we'll send it right after you. For everybody else, also for the students, you can again ask questions through the chat function in the GoToWebinar. I'm getting them here on the screen, and I will try to tell them to Bert as quick as possible, so we have a lot of questions. So without further ado, Bert, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Leon. Very kind introduction, particularly when you said that I'm well placed for that. I'm actually quite hesitant about that. I was actually a bit nervous when I was asked to give this talk, this webinar this afternoon.
I can imagine.
It is a very, very big subject and a very, very big question. We're in the times of crisis. There's a pandemic around us, but it's not just a pandemic of the virus. There's also, you could almost call it an infodemic. There's a huge amount of information floating around.
Yeah. Everybody wants to have information as well.
Absolutely. There's also an enormous amount of opinions going around about what this crisis means for society, for the economy, obviously also for businesses. You can find opinions which are very optimistic. You can find opinions which are very, very pessimistic. So I thought, it is with some trepidation to start this. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, there's also a certain amount of inevitability. You have to do it now. Yeah. Companies are at this moment thinking about their future. And as a business school, we are clearly also thinking about what changes will take place and how they could evolve. So I will try and give some tentative indications about where things could be moving. Mm-hmm. I may discover in only a week that I've been on a completely wrong track on some of these domains, because that is the speed in which things are developing at this moment.
I think that is for most of the experts that we are talking to. Nobody knows how this ends.
There's a lot of hesitation and carefulness in the things I'd like to say. These are some of the things I would like to go through this afternoon. We may be kicked off track because questions may come in, and clearly we'll also try and discuss these as they come in. And first of all, I would almost like to step back a little bit from the crisis itself, because although it is, of course, so overwhelmingly visible and happening, at the same time, it is something which will pass in a way. It has come in an incredible speed. It will not disappear in that same speed, unfortunately. And new paradigms may emerge after that. But at the same time, if we look back a few decades, there have been drivers and dynamics, which I would call the slow variables, which were already with us. And I have no doubt that even after this crisis, many of these variables will still be there. Sometimes it's called megatrends, and
they will continue. Like with Katrina's last week, also said that the energy transition is a long-term goal. It's not something that we just little glitch maybe. Hopefully.
Yeah, it won't. Maybe it won't be a little glitch, but I think there are, as I say, dynamics and variables which will stay with us. And I'd like to begin with discussing a few of these. There's been a lot of discussion about these also in the courses. When I discuss it with the participants, you quickly come up with a list of 10 or 15 or even 20 drivers and dynamics which are taking place at this moment. We've distilled them to 5 or 6 key elements in there. I'd like to share a few before I move on then. First of all, how have energy companies so far try to make sense of that? It's sometimes called a 3D or a 3-dimensional challenge. I'll say also something about that, because some of these dynamics are perhaps reinforced because of the crisis we're in. Some of them may be not so paramount anymore as we move forward. Then obviously I have to look at Corona and give some notions about where it could be,
what might happen,
what could happen. As I say, very, very hesitant. And then that's also, I think, a subject of debate in many, be it the boardroom or be it the kitchen table. What's next? How can we make sense of it all? And I'll step back to some, I would almost say, old tools of how is that being done.
And maybe also to take into account that we got some questions from that. For example, flexibility. How important is that? Now you see that this is absolutely crucial. That you have
absolutely. Is it has our whole economic system over all the world? Now this is a very big statement. Is it now shown that it's actually in some ways quite fragile? And is the resilience and the flexibility indeed not sufficient to deal with these kind of crises? So that will be certainly an element of the future as it will evolve. Now, let's first of all look maybe at some of what I would call the slow variables. And as an introductory remark, it may be so that the next normal, as is now called after Corona, will be radically different. But I think you could argue that some of these slow variables may continue to shape the future and the business environment. I always like to be in good company, so I've picked 5 of these, and I try to illustrate each of these. We're not going to do that today, but when people have time, they can do it later with a little TEDx or TED movie. The TED speakers are clearly some of the best speakers of this world. And I was struck by 5 perspectives which were shown there, and very, very briefly make a remark on each of these. And I start on the upper left corner there, which is sometimes that's a graph which you can't see probably from home, but it shows that the ecological pressure we are now exerting on the planet is much more than just the climate challenge. The climate challenge is a big one, but we also are losing in an incredible speed biodiversity. We're losing our access to freshwater resources. The ocean gets more and more acid, which puts pressure on the ability of the ocean to support its own ecological systems.
There's CO2 as well.
All these kind of things are happening at the same time. And some people even say that the climate challenge out of these ecological issues is maybe not the most difficult one, because many technologies are available to do something about it. And sometimes it's even economically attractive to work on the climate challenge. Some of these
other parts of the pollution as well, like the direct visible pollution,
absolutely,
which we see disappearing now to a certain extent due to Corona.
That's right.
The biggest experiment in the world.
One of the very rare positive aspects of Corona, I think, that we see now. But it's sometimes called the race to the cliff. I mean, we have been moving at breakneck speed to an ecological situation which is not sustainable, which cannot support economic development. So that's the first trend, and that we have to do something about that is, I think, as important after this Corona crisis as it was before that. So we actually see that this fast Corona crisis in a way merges with this slow crisis, this slow ecological trend which goes in the megatrend which goes in the wrong way. So one of the most important ones there. The second one is what's sometimes called the great equalization. What we see is that the economies, in spite of what you sometimes think, are in a way converging. One of the very interesting indicators of that is, for instance, that in the past 50 years, the average lifespan of people all over the world has moved to the order of about 75 years or even beyond. Even in countries where it was only 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That means that health systems can support people over that kind of period, but also that economies can support people even if they're no longer in the working age.
Yeah.
This kind of convergence also takes place in an economic sense. We all get similarly wealthy, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, the issue of that is, of course,
getting people out of the poverty as well. You see that already happening
in a hurry.
lot. Yeah,
we see that happening.
Yeah.
And that means, and then it links to the first trend, is that also the pressure on resources to meet the new demands for well-being, for wealth, and for health is also growing. People are looking for more material resources, maybe also for more energy. That is not possible. And there's no God-given right that Europeans or Americans deserve 5 times as much of the resources of the earth than people in India or in East Asia or in South America. So we have to also get to some sort of convergence there at a lower level in terms of what we take from the earth.
Yeah,
so
like
we have
more efficient, basically.
efficiency,
better division.
circularity, very important there. Renewable resources. Now, again, this trend, and I would almost say hopefully will continue, where the amount of resources used will reflect the population distribution of the world. So India, with 2 times as many people as Europe, deserves 2 times as much resources and
or hopefully 4 times as more efficient, because of course we cannot sustain all that.
Together we go down on the circular path, etc. The third one is perhaps that's demographics. Now, demographics, there's a lot of talk about that. Some people are still, and I think with reason, very concerned about the population pressure on the earth. For instance, in Africa, population is still growing very rapidly. Economists actually talk about depopulation, where in many of the developed countries, at least the people in the working age, so from between 20 years and 65 years, are declining. Already 60 countries of the world, the whole of Europe, parts of East Asia, we see already a decline in population.
The grey wave, so to say. Huh?
It's the grey wave and the green disappearance.
The green
it's all happening. So that's demographics. But the one I would lift it out here is the urbanization, the track to the cities, with 50 to 100 million people per annum, a migration we've never seen before, moving from the countryside to cities. That means that the whole world becomes city-based. Now, an interesting question you asked earlier is the concern of people living so close together.
Yeah, the 1.5 meter economy is going to be very difficult.
The 1.5 meter economy in the city is very difficult. So are people now moving back to the countryside? I don't know. We haven't seen that, of course, for the past decades. And at this moment, we don't know, but at least until 2 or 3 months ago, we saw this development of what they sometimes call megalopolises, very difficult word, which everywhere are happening, with upwards of 20 million people per city.
Yeah, that enormous amount of people.
Incredible what is living there. So business models have to ask themselves, am I relevant for an urbanized world? That is a crucial question. Now, and the last 2 things hang together.
Just one thing to add to that is also with Corona, you see that it's a very globalized world, which is a good thing, you mentioned, but on the same time, it's also a risk, because if these global structures fail for some reason, then we also would like to have our production a little bit more here.
Absolutely, I'll come to that.
Yeah, exactly. That's
absolutely
a reverse trend almost.
Absolutely, the fragility is now illustrated from some of these global supply chains.
Also with food chains, I would say. Yeah.
It's also in food. It's in materials beyond medicine. It's more than that. Now, then the third dynamic, I think, which also stays with us, is the dynamic of technological acceleration. There's often driven by digitization. I mean, the iPhones of today have the same computing power as the Cray of the 90s, and that filled the whole room.
Yeah.
Now you can imagine what a whole room of iPhones in terms of computing power has. That then leads to the development of artificial intelligence, now even applied in the search for the vaccine. It leads to robotics. These kind of developments, all directly derived from the digital developments. Many technological developments in other areas also are based on what has been made possible in the digital arena. And maybe somewhat apart from that is the developments in the biotech, in the biotechnology world. That's also very, very important. Maybe sometimes a little bit more under the radar. Now, again, very important if we're looking for the vaccine, but also can biotech address some of the food issues? Can it address material issues? Can biological processes generate much more of the material resources we need?
Or even the energy we need.
And clearly also in the energy arena. So technological acceleration. And the last one, which I call the pervasive connectivity. Everything is connected. Obviously being made possible by technology, but a trend in itself, a world of data, of people which are connected, of things that are connected.
I have the idea that this is also accelerating now massively due to Corona. I know that the talks that we have in the Netherlands about using apps to at least get a grip on the Corona spreading.
Absolutely.
But also in Asia, you already have this to a large extent.
And what possibilities have we now discovered in terms of connectivity through digital means? Now we have to.
Exactly. Working from home is indeed. Luckily that the virus struck in 2020 and not in 1990, because then it would be more difficult.
That's right. Although travel would have been less in 1990. So it's. So again, very briefly summarized here again, these 5 trends: the unprecedented human pressure on ecology, the global equalization, which rises the demand for materials and energy, so we have to move to circularity and renewables, urbanization combined with other demographic trends, technology developments, and connectivity and data. These 5 developments, and I believe that.
Slow variables, like you mentioned, the things that are going on
These things have been happening for 20 or 30 years. And I think they will go on happening for 10 or 15 years. Although, as you said, the trek to the cities, are we now getting concerned about being so close together?
Well, maybe it's a one-time thing.
We have to see that, absolutely. Now, in this world, you see that the energy sector has been trying to make sense of that and sort of distill some key features of how the energy world is evolving in all this. And it's sometimes called the 3-dimensional or the 3D challenge. That's a Rubik's Cube, also a 3D challenge. Not so easy if you've never done that before. So let's look at that. And I think these 3Ds have been very, very often mentioned, that energy companies which want to stay relevant in a world driven by some of these slow variables, by some of these dynamics, decarbonization, the energy sector must decarbonize because of the race to the cliff, which we have to stop. And in fact, it goes beyond it. Decarbonization is shorthand. It goes beyond that. You have to look at all the sustainability issues, sometimes even perhaps the social sustainability issues, all summarized in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So decarbonization, if you don't have an avenue for yourself, how you can play a role in a decarbonizing world, arguably it's very difficult to have a future.
It's going to be less, at least.
It's very difficult to have a future.
In your opinion, to hook in on this part, like, how successful is that at the moment? Like, how many of these shifts, these big companies, of course, mostly still operate in the more traditional way. You see new business models and new energy emerging, but it's still limited.
It is arguably the development of decarbonized energy supply and renewables as part of that, efficiency, circularity even. It is happening at breakneck speed, but so far, the growth in demand for energy, at least on a global scale, was also very, very large. And it has been even very, very difficult to keep up with that growth. So we still see that the decarbonization is very, very difficult. There was some hopeful signs. 2019, last year, seemed to show a flattening in terms of CO2 emission. This year we'll probably see a drop in CO2 emission, but that's clearly because of the economic downturn we go through.
That happened in 2008 as well, 2009.
Absolutely. And then we saw this recovery and pickup. And that's still this slow crisis of the ecological deprivation has to be addressed. So an energy company has to find a slot in that. The second thing, and it links, I think, to some of the trends I also earlier showed, is digitization and data, where whole new business models are emerging because it is now possible. We have, and we see that particularly, I think, in the utility space, the electricity providers, the gas providers to a degree, where you see that, and that then also links to the third D of decentralization, where you see that consumers, be it industries, be it people, become not so much an off-taker of energy, but become an active node in an energy system. So they become givers of energy and takers of energy. It's a give and take economy.
Not only a consumer anymore.
Exactly. So you get these kind of presumers.
Is this also more the domain of the SMEs instead of the big utility companies or energy company, integrated energy companies that we know of?
Yes, you see that this is a space where small to medium enterprises can come up and then begin to compete with larger players which are already in that arena. Sometimes afterwards they are then acquired by some of the bigger companies, but because of the very low starting overhead, you can almost start an energy company from your attic. That's what's happening here. This is not the whole story because so digitization is absolutely crucial. The last thing is decentralization. So there's also the localization of energy systems. Some argue, and I think that there's a point there, that decentralized energy systems are not the whole story. That to get a full system decarbonized, we also need large-scale solutions, like offshore wind energy, like perhaps even nuclear in some perspectives, like large infrastructure, perhaps for hydrogen, perhaps for...
to look at it as an integrated system as well, to make sure that everybody has the same
Absolutely. So we see
access.
that, yes, decentralization is new. It will emerge. It gives business opportunities. But at the same time, large parts and large systems will also stay a part of the energy system we have. If you look at, for
instance,
instance,
because simply they are there, or is it because they are more cheaper, more efficient? Why do you think?
Yeah, maybe sometimes because they're there. Pipelines are there, so let's use them.
Why not use them?
Why not use them? But some things were not there yet. If you look at offshore wind energy, for instance, that wasn't there. But it's also the recognition that localized energy systems will have some difficulty to meet the energy demand of whole societies and whole economies. So
also within
maybe
the time frame, within when you needed demand supply problems, that kind of thing.
Not just in the the time frame has something to do, but also the purely the amount of energy you need to let societies run is very difficult to get that added up from all the distributed and smaller energy systems. It is very good if there's also if there are big hitters in the system,
big assets,
like offshore wind energy, maybe solar in the center of Spain, maybe even bioenergy in some arenas.
Or hydrogen being imported and created in the desert.
Hydrogen being imported, exactly. Although that could be fragile as we look at it now, but indeed that's absolutely also part of the solution. So decentralization, yes, there's a lot of business opportunity there, but it's not the whole story of the energy system. Now, with that, and then I think we move to Corona. With that, I think we've sort of discussed a little bit some of the slow variables which continue to shape business environments, also for energy companies, but also for other companies, of course. Some of the conclusions which have been drawn by the energy sector, we have to relate ourselves to a decentralizing world, a localizing world, to a world which is digital, where data are generating new business models and which has to decarbonize. So that's where we stood only 2 or 3 months ago. And now I have to wonder whether all these things still remain relevant or even get backwind from the crisis we now have
or
to go
get
through.
delayed to a certain extent, even, well, not fatally, I would not say fatally, but at least that some things like
Yes.
the Green Deal, like this integration, energy integration.
Absolutely. It can, and that is, I think, where the opinions really diverge at this moment, where some people say, we have to rebuild anyway, let's rebuild in a good way. And other people say, it will become so urgent to get economies running again, it doesn't matter how you feed them, be
as
it
long as
dirty, be it
they
clean.
being fed. Yeah,
Absolutely. So that's where I think opinions are at this moment diverging. I'm today I will be on the optimistic and hopeful side. I think we need hope in this day and age. What we now hear being discussed is we're in the midst of the crisis still. We come from let's put it between quotation marks, from a normal situation, a world we knew, dynamic as it was. And many people say, that normality will not return in its fullness. There will be a next normal or a new normal after this. And it can be, in some respects, quite different from what we knew. Now, what are then things which could be happening? Now, first of all, what is Corona? Now, I don't have to summarize because you read it every day in the newspaper. A near exponential growth. Maybe you read too much of it. Seems to be containment in China and East Asia. Early signs of some control in Europe, but still very, very worrying.
Yeah, it's flattening a little bit.
What I find really amazing is that 30 to 40% of the global population is now constrained, is restrained, be it a lockdown or an intelligent lockdown or whatever. I mean, that is just astonishing what has been happening.
All 3 major markets are experiencing the same break. This has also never happened.
This has never happened before. What is, of course, now very challenging is what is the exit strategy? How do we get out of this without falling back in the crisis we were in? Very difficult to see how we move away from the lockdown and distancing, which will have major impact on the economy as it can develop again here after this. And the societal impact, I think there will be books written about that, is also uncertain. Once we all get used to this 1.5 meter or 2 meter distance, will we ever get back together? I don't know. I mean, we are at 2 meters
we're
now.
already here.
It's
doable. Yeah.
And we used to be closer, Leon. So it's uncharted territory in many ways. But nevertheless, uncharted as it may be, I've been using here some insights from, and I'll come back to that later, from many people who are watching this. I was particularly impressed by how McKinsey, for instance, is now following the Corona developments. Also, in their analysis, there is this hint of optimism, and I like that. I think we all need that. But a few notions which are coming up, and I've just picked a few. Aspects on globalization. Second, there's a typo there. That's the societal paradigm rather than globalization should be there. The third one is the public goods perception. How do we value public goods? Mobility, privacy, and values. Now, what we see on these, and I'll very briefly touch on each of these, and each of them are very, very contentious, and it could go the completely different way after a year. So this is very, very difficult.
Every expert
has different views on this. But what we saw in the economies so far in terms of globalization, that efficiency was the dominant rationale. If it is cheaper to produce in China, we're going to produce in China. If it is more efficient to produce all the medicines and all the base materials for medicine in India, we're going to do that.
And look at it now.
Value chains, it doesn't matter if supply chains cross the globe. As long as it is cheaper in the end, it's fine. Now, what we now see is that there is a revaluation, if you like, of resilience. Is that robust? Is it safe?
Yeah.
Will it stay there? So you could see, and we're beginning to see that now. Only today I heard that we're going to make the mouth caps now in the mouth masks
The mask
in the Netherlands. A company which made beds will now be making mouth masks. Because we're not sure whether we can get them even from France. I mean, it's that kind of localization of critical supply chains. Most of the critical supply chains are now linked to health, but it could go beyond that.
Yeah. For energy as well, it's a very globalized world. We get energy from all over the place.
We get energy from all over the place, but not only that, we also get all the equipment we need for the new energy reality, like the solar panels, like the materials for the windmills. It all comes from elsewhere.
Yeah.
Very few
true.
regions have the full supply chain in-house. Is that safe? That is going to be one of the key questions, I think.
So it's also an opportunity, you think? Eh? It can be an opportunity. Like
Absolutely. It's already an opportunity for this bad manufacturer, which now has a whole new business line.
But also for the energy. If you say, okay, we have to recover to a certain extent. Of course, we have to recover our economies, but then we're pumping in millions and trillions of euros. Perhaps attach. We had this question before with other guests in this table, like connected to this energy transition, connected to more localized or European energy system.
Yes.
You think that's a good idea?
Yeah, well, if it's always a good idea, maybe I like a globalized and a linked world to a degree. But at the same time, I think that there are other issues about globalization which have also come under scrutiny and under debate. And that it was perhaps not always a good idea to have this manufacturing capacity almost concentrated in China for the whole world. Is that even for the resilience of your societies in a broader sense a thing to do? So,
or even the development, sorry to interrupt you, even the development of the societies. If you said, okay, efficiency is key, or at least lowest price is key. So perhaps we should rethink after this, is lowest price everything?
Absolutely.
Do we need other things like sustainability, ecological impact, or working levels?
It is now clear that we're willing to sacrifice economic efficiencies and economies as a whole if we are really threatened in terms of health. And there are other threats. So I think there will be a new value to resilience and localization. And that in a way could link a little bit to the decentralization and localization trends which energy companies were already preparing for. So there is a
sort of natural
convergence
flow.
there. Absolutely. The second one is on if you like, market or societal paradigms. And it links to that. There has always been a dominance of market thinking in the economy. Markets are king in a way. Now we suddenly find out that when it really comes to the crunch, market principles may not save us.
They go overboard very quickly.
So we see that perhaps market principles are in a way challenged and constrained by public interest. And we now see that in a very, very radical way. But more in a general sense, it could change the paradigm a little bit. No, it is not just the economy. There is more to it, and the public values and the public interest could become more important as we move forward. And that brings me automatically, these six are hanging together, is the perception of public goods and public services. And you could argue there has been a relative undervaluation, also in salaries, I would say, for the public part of societies, be it teachers, be it health workers.
All the crucial working groups are usually also the ones that get paid less.
It is an extraordinary paradox that all the people who are now, suddenly we discover that they are really crucial for society. And for a long time, undervalued as compared to the private sector, be it in salaries, be it in other ways. Now, of course, these things hang together because the private sector, in a way, pay for the public sector. So there is a link between these two. It's not as if you can miss the one completely. But we do see a much more pronounced role of governments and a recalibration of the balance between markets and the public goods.
Which can help the energy transition a lot. Because
Absolutely.
The prices are usually still too high, so you need some kind of role of the governments to at least get the way fixed. And that's exactly what we need.
Exactly. And in fact, it helps it in many ways because I think energy is now also being recognized as one of these public necessities and not something which is just delivered by markets. It is a public necessity.
Yeah.
That it is there, and arguably on top of that, that it is clean and acceptable in many ways as it evolves. Now, another thing is our view on mobility. Now, I don't know how this will play out as we move forward, but we could argue that mobility of goods and people has been completely unchallenged in the old normal. It's about people.
Traveling all over the world.
Traveling all over the world,
which is nice as well, but it has some drawbacks.
Either for holidays or for work, traveling was never challenged, but also for goods. It didn't matter how long the supply chains were, as long as there was efficiency to be gained. Let it go. Let it go.
Yeah.
Now, there's absolutely an acceleration of digitization, which could reduce, in a way, the physical mobility of people. It's interesting to see whether also with this tension on globalization, also the mobility for goods is challenged in a way in as we move forward. And this could have an impact, for instance, on the perspectives on mobility is seen as one of the biggest grower in terms of energy demand, in terms of ecological space it uses. It's an interesting question whether that can be a little bit moderated with our new perspective on how necessary all these movements are for people, for goods.
But you already see that. I find it quite interesting that what even these times, I know only the figures of the Netherlands, is that people buy 25 to 30% less stuff anyway. So apparently they don't miss it. You know, like it's you maybe they do miss it, but to a certain extent it's not entirely necessary apparently. So why would you have all that stuff in the
that's almost an ethical value thing. I'll come to that as well. In terms of privacy, that's another thing, and the way we deal with data and digitization. In the old normal, I mean, this is a very, very diverse picture all over the world. There have been already regions where privacy and data security was maybe already under tension. But in many countries, privacy and freedom concerns constrained governments and also big tech companies in terms of what they could do with data. What we now see is that privacy in a way loses ground to our sense of security and even also to government control. And it's sometimes this is a little bit tricky. You could argue. I mean, where does this bring us? Now it is privacy and this health security we feel all connected to. Before you know it, it is security which has to do with the power of the state or
your movements.
Whatever. Many other reasons why you would want to know everything about people and about data which are going, about even information which is shared.
Which is also a paradox if you look again to the energy world, is that you are, if you, for example, think, we need to make it more efficient to be able to deliver the same amount of services with less energy, then the more you know about each other and the more you know where you have the information, the more efficient it can become.
Yes.
But like you said, it can also be hijacked for different
It can be hijacked for different reasons. Anyway, I think that privacy concerns are sort of little bit losing ground to some of the other concerns. And that has pluses and minuses, let's put it that way. But I think you do see it. And the last thing, and this is maybe an all-encompassing thing and very difficult to say, has something to do with values and almost ethics in society. Now, it's very difficult to say. We're only 2 months in it, so how can you already say how this will shift? It's very, very difficult to do. What has been argued is that in the old normal, economic gain, competition and efficiency were perceived almost as values in themselves. They are not values, but they are perceived as values. When it's efficient, it's good.
That was the aim we all aim for.
We all aim for it. But that's not a value. Values have much more to do with care, with well-being in a much broader sense. That's where the values come from. And in a way, you could get a recalibration of values in society. And what has already been shown is that when these much deeper values of security and health are threatened, that societies are willing to sacrifice enormous amount of economic gains for something which is deeper, which is more fundamental.
Yeah, saving people's lives, basically.
Saving people's lives.
Yeah.
Now, some people argue that now we've experienced this, we will do that also in other domains to address climate concerns, to address ecological concerns. I think the jury is still out. It's too soon.
But you do feel that that's necessary to take into account. Like, okay, the pricing, like the new normal could be in the long term actually cheaper than the old normal, because the old normal did not take into account all the costs and that were associated with the production efficiency and things like that.
That's right, absolutely. And so with that, then the question becomes, how do we? So we've sort of explored the field now, and then the question becomes, and then we move to the sort of the conclusions gradually. How can companies navigate in this very strange world that nobody has ever been in? And here again, courtesy to McKinsey, and I was quite struck by the 5 R's they brought out, and I really like that. And they call it resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. And it's linked to time horizons. So it was so sudden and so fast that you had to think in time frames of days. Yeah. Suddenly, it was no longer possible to get the people to your office because it was no longer safe. It was a very, very rapid reset back to basics. Mm-hmm. What is really necessary to keep going, and what can I leave out?
What do we need, actually?
And it was a whole society does that, but many companies do the same. So it is, you suddenly, in a week's time, you're in survival mode. And then very soon after, you get the next mode, and that's the resilience mode. I mean, how can I scale down and still be there, not going bust? I mean, what do I have? Liquidity resources? Do I have money even to survive the next weeks? Yeah. These kind of questions come up.
Perhaps you didn't need it, or you thought you didn't need it, but certainly you have to look at it.
Suddenly, that's key for your survival. It's very urgent. Yeah. And then, can I adjust work processes when half of my workforce, or even 3/4, or even 90% of my workforce is at home? Mm-hmm. Where is that not possible? Where is it possible? These kind of adjustments have to take place in a period of only 2 or 3 weeks, so that then the next phase, which can last for months, perhaps after the immediate crisis, the 1.5 meter society we may live in for a few months after that. So can I get the lines open again? Can I find my customers back? Can I get my supplies back running? Yeah. These are the kind of questions which come after that. Can I, or do I operate in this period of month at maybe only 60% of my capacity? Can I find the right scale to survive that? And can I get help, maybe from government, maybe from others, to get there? You make plans, contingency planning, but at least you try and return yourself to what you was. Mm-hmm. But that is not enough. Return to what you was. It's fine. It's understandable. But maybe the next normal, with these elements we've just discussed, is not the same as the world you came from.
Yeah. So you do not fit anymore.
You don't fit
completely
anymore.
Yeah.
And that's of course very challenging. And then you get into the position of what they call a reimagination in the period of months or a year. Mm-hmm. You have to be fast because the world will be there in maybe a year time.
But different. So you have to reimagine what kind of business model, what kind of services, clients, etc.
Exactly. When I weigh all the slow variables, the things I thought I already understood about my new business, and the things which come out of Corona, and can I, with that, define or chart new business models for myself? Do I have to get rid of parts which do not fit in this new world? Do I have to innovate? Yeah. Although in a year you can't do very much on innovation, of course, but you can innovate business models in this short term. And then after that, you get the reform phase, where you actually become a new player. And some players will look very much like what they were a year ago.
Yeah.
But some of them will have gone through. Now, how do you do that? And then it's interesting that you can almost fall back on old tools in the toolbox, which I think are in the pocket of every company which is operating now. And
But then it's more a question of speed, I would say. This is so quick. This is so quick. I mean, normally a company would go through this, an energy company, for example, would go through this kind of system anyway because of the slow trend. Absolutely. And now suddenly it's bam, we're here and you have to change. Yeah.
Shell, for instance, traditionally takes 4 years to make a new set of scenarios.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to work with scenarios, but at least there's no 4 years. That's
There was also not this scenario.
It's not enough. It's not enough. Now, and then you get to these kind of old tools, and of course I'm not going through them, but it struck me how relevant they are and how useful they can be. There's the old thing like the SWOT analysis, the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis, where you just look at, I look at a few trends. So if that's the case, I go from global efficiency to local resilience. Am I well placed? Mm-hmm. What are my strengths? What can I do already? Why is it threatening to me? Yeah. How can I avoid that threat? What is my weakness? Where should I invest upon? And are there opportunities? Maybe I can grow much bigger than I used to be. Yeah. These kind of very quick. And only yesterday I had a classroom, and only 20 minutes, people already can come up with some of these dynamics which are now changing. Mm-hmm. And very quickly can say, okay, that's what it could mean for a utility. Yeah. That's what it could mean for a major oil and gas supplier. Mm-hmm. Now, some of these developments are there. There will be more global resilience, global efficiency to local resilience. We've discussed that one. Can we get to a world where the business driver is no longer just economics or even primarily economics, but where it is ecology or even the sustainable development goals as primary driver? How do I look then? Mm-hmm. Am I strong? Am I weak? Are there opportunities and those kind of things? And then very rapidly make some strategic notions. I mean, we are in the phase of reimagining. We're not rebuilding the company. It's reimagining. What would I do to harvest the strengths I have, mm-hmm. or to mitigate the weaknesses I have in these kind of arenas? Yeah. So,
but again, much faster. That's the main thing, I think.
Exactly.
Do it right now. That's again what I told you about, what I asked you about flexibility. How important is flexibility? It's crucial.
Absolutely. And that's why what I liked also about this image from McKinsey, that, for a reimagine, you only have months to a year. You have to be ready for the next one, because otherwise you won't survive. That's the speed we are talking about now. So I put some of these trends also from market logic to public dominance. Dominance may be strong, but at least a new value of mm-hmm. the public interest in energy, if we talk about it here, and ecology. Yeah. And
how important do you value it? Yeah.
Absolutely. So this old tool is still very, very relevant in what we do. Slightly more sophisticated is the scenario building exercises, like what, as I was saying, Shell is doing. Yeah. So try and indeed make a big inventory of the dynamics you really believe in, mm-hmm. will be happening. Try and find the critical uncertainties, which could go, is it deglobalization or is it new globalization? And what is the difference between these? Yeah. And can you find some of these critical uncertainties and build worlds? Say, well, the world could be like this, and can you then, as a company, make strategic choices which make you robust in mm-hmm. each of the worlds which may emerge? Yeah. So scenarios, again, an old tool. We know how to do it, but now it suddenly has to be done in the coming months. So I think the strategy
weeks,
departments,
probably even. Yeah, it's
the strategy departments. Well, they can't go to work anyway, so they can do it from home and digital, and
they can really think about it.
And the last one, also an old tool from Harvard. This one is where you build your innovation and business development portfolios. Again, very, very classical. What were you? Who were you serving in the past? What were your customers? And what were your services? What did you offer? What were the products? and think away from that. I mean, what is the next step I could move into? Or even the transformational changes. And then we indeed are talking about reimagination and reform. Now, again, normally this is done in a period of 10 years. And you take your time and you do innovations and mergers and acquisitions, etc. And now it all has to happen much more in a hurry.
Right away.
But it doesn't mean that this way of looking at your business, like what is my core, what is the next one, what is adjacent, and what is transformational, is not still a very, very valid model to work your way, if you like, through the...
Is it also not a risk to certain companies? I mean, some of these, we don't know how long this lasts. So it can be that it is not a glitch. I wouldn't say the glitch, but that is a relatively short period where the old normal is no longer relevant, but then we go back to the new normal. Yeah. So once you have transformed, you've done this exercise, you transformed your company completely.
Yeah, and then you've misjudged.
And then you misjudged, yeah.
Misjudged.
What is your advice, so to say? Like, do you have to do this indeed, or do you just think about it and not necessarily implement?
Well, that is something which is very difficult to judge indeed at this moment. At this moment, we can recognize that many companies of this world are under tremendous pressure. And arguably even the energy companies sometimes less than some of the other companies.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even more difficult to be a restaurant or to
we still need energy, so everything is still going on.
Or an event organization or a musician. I mean, there are even companies, because these can also be whole companies and whole business models, which are even under more stress. And this, after health, energy is something which really is underpinning society. So you always have to be careful if you transform your businesses. So there will be an element of getting the new elements off the ground, let them grow, and not completely saying goodbye to some of the elements which were relevant in the old normal. And it is that kind of careful steering, even under in this pressure cooker we are now in, which still has to be done.
Yeah, true.
So that's true. Now, do that. Okay, sorry. This one. So that's the same McKinsey, and there are some notions on the energy side, like from the start. I think the energy companies have to have the resolve to keep the world going. In that sense, they are fundamental, like a hospital. I mean, if the hospital doesn't get energy, it can't work anymore. So you are crucial.
We cannot make masks anymore. There's no energy.
That's very good, but at the same time, very quickly look at the resilience of your company, back to basics, or at least get to the focus of keeping the world running, and maybe delaying some of the other roles you were playing. And then after that, you get the phase of reimagining. I think many of the companies are already now right in the middle of that. Taking into account, as I say, the slow variables, the 3D challenge, the very preliminary assessment of what Corona could offer you, and come with the old tools, but maybe other tools are used as well in companies, and do that. Do it, first of all, fast, and then take your time to work the conclusions out. Do not sort of sell off everything you have.
No, exactly.
That's not the way to do it. You have to build in flexibility.
But it can be then more. It is indeed. If we talk about the energy world in general, there's also a question from the audience about the CO2 price. Like, is this perhaps not even the moment to introduce such a CO2 price? Because like you said, energy underpins the system to a certain extent, so it's a crucial thing. It will stay there. But we are talking about the transition. So do we take this opportunity to accelerate the transition by adding a CO2 price, by having people starting again and then with a different...
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's just one of the instruments, of course, to achieve this CO2 reduction. And arguably, at this moment, of course, the CO2 price has collapsed because there's now so much.
There's so much left over.
Plenty of it. But so maybe should take out the things which have now not been used or utilized at this moment. So that will automatically bring up the CO2 price in the trading systems.
Or
so
perhaps even set it as a level where you if you start up again. So if you like with these billions and trillions of euros,
25,
we start up again, but then you have to be this efficient, otherwise.
Do you
think that's a good idea, or do you think that disrupts the system completely?
It's very difficult to say. That could be a way to do it. I think if you still want to keep some of that market mechanism, that CO2 is reduced first in these places where it is cheapest, it's probably a better idea to take out a lot of the CO2 rights out of the market at this moment. And then it will find its level anyway, because we were sitting at the level of 25 to 30 euros per ton. And that will go up from there. But also, I mean, there's an argument also to set it to set a base level for it. Absolutely. Final note, if you allow me,
of course.
That keeps us just within the hour. The global economy takes a huge knock. That's obvious. So the energy sector needs agility, and it may have to scale down in a hurry. A shrunk economy needs less energy. That's quite obvious if you say it like this. And casualties are likely. Not all the energy companies will survive this. That's the first thing, and maybe a point of concern if you're in this business. But the second thing, rebuilding societies and economies requires energy. That's also obvious. These are two obvious statements, and that means that the energy sector can and will be and should be part of the solution and the rebuilding.
But and perhaps slightly, sorry to interrupt you, slightly different then. Exactly. More focused on the energy transition, perhaps.
Exactly. And then we get actually, it is if we then add the two things, I mean, first of all, the crisis shows a global willingness to do something when the need is really there. This is a health need. Now,
that's
the slow crisis is also there. And maybe this indicates that the world, when really pushed, is willing to do something. And
also quicker than we all thought, maybe. As a bit of a pessimistic scenario.
It's amazing what has been done. The world is willing to act and invest. Now, energy sector can become an element of that transition, and it should become an element of that transition. Particularly if we manage to make this recovery, this rebuilding, a green rebuilding. And so it's sort of, they sometimes say, right second time. The first bill we made, there was a few mistakes were made. We were all getting very healthy, wealthy, and so on.
But not the planet, unfortunately.
But the planet not. So let's do it the next time. Now we have to rebuild the world. Let's do it right now. And that's, I think, now, this is the last sheet. Governments, public goods and services are revalued. I discussed that. That's, in my mind, there's very little doubt about it. That will happen. And energy positioned as a component of that public good set, these public services, particularly if it is also greener and cleaner, more decentralized, more localized, etc., positions in a way the energy sector in an excellent way. But it has to be a reformed and reimagined energy
system.
sector.
Do you think we will go back to what we had like 20 years ago, where we were it was state companies, these utilities, for example? Do you think that's an? I'm not asking you to do a forecast on that.
No,
maybe more of a general remark on it.
That's very difficult to say. We have seen that. I think was it in the UK, a country of privatizations, where I think the railways have been sort of nationalized, at least temporarily. That is not necessarily required, I think. But even so, even if that's not the case, still the public value will be greater than it was before. Now. The last three is that values beyond economic gain have achieved prominence, and I think new energy business models should also address these values. Not just it's cheaper to be with me, but values which have to do with care, with social cohesion, with health, with security,
with security work.
All these kind of elements. We now know that at the end of the day, these are more important.
They make up the society, actually, instead of only gain and efficiency.
What builds a society. Now, digitization has received a boost in this period. So digital business models, they were already popular. They will become even more popular, I think. That's my prediction there. And also, I think the drive to decentralization and more local energy systems may also receive a boost as we get a little bit more concerned about global supply chains in this. So we may also see that maybe even the solar factories will be reshored, as it's now sometimes called in a way. There are other elements which also make that possible because these production processes are more and more automated, which means that the labor cost is a smaller and smaller component. Then becomes easier to reshore some of these activities. So you could see a building industry around energy.
Get back here, basically.
Get back to a degree. So that's, I think, the last thing.
Thank you very much.
The table is turned.
The table is turned. Let's see where it goes. I think you summarized it excellently. That we are in this rapidly changing world. That can also be for good actually. Absolutely. You don't, of course, if the economy has a dent in it, investments will stop to a certain extent. But you can also reinvest in the correct things. And I think you highlighted very nicely that that's also possible.
Absolutely.
So let's keep it on this positive note that we are hoping that all these trillions of euros will come back to the energy transition, at least a part of it.
Yes.
Maybe just good for the audience. There are some more questions, but again, last time we will put them on paper and Bert will try to answer them as good as possible. 30th of April, we have another webinar planned with Yusri Mandoor, where we actually surviving this disruptive change. So where we go a little bit in deeper how energy companies can actually survive this. Next week we have another webinar planned, but a little bit more closer to home, the North Sea energy system, how that is actually impacted by the current situation, but also how it looked like from now with René Peters from TNO and with Mirala Schot from the New Energy Coalition. So I hope you all join us again next week. And again, thank you, Bert. Thank you to the audience. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.